Business success is a combination of deep customer knowledge and deep technical knowledge. It's the unique combination of them together that gives you competitive advantage.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
Our guest today is Reza Farahani. He's a data scientist, and he used data to develop deep insights into human emotions and human motivations. He took those skills and turned them into a startup business, WFHomie, that was able to identify emotional factors in team collaboration, in engagement, in satisfaction in the workplace, and he used this to develop incentives that keep teams happy, healthy, and productive. That's fulfilling a real need. Reza, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're excited to talk to you today. You're a data scientist, as we'll find out. You're a successful entrepreneur. You and I are going to talk a little bit about one of our mental models for creating value in the marketplace and building a business, which is the combination of customer knowledge and technical knowledge. So customer knowledge, we think, is qualitative and subjective and kind of touchy-feely, and technology is objective and something specific that you can learn. And if you put those two together, you sometimes get terrific results, and you've done that in your business. So that's what we'd like to talk about and see if we can help guide others who are thinking in similar directions. So as a data scientist, Reza, tell us how you got to be a data scientist, what that exploration was like before you started your business. How did you become a data scientist?
I was a student at University of Waterloo doing engineering. And kind of when I graduated, I actually applied for like two schools. One was MIT and the other one Princeton. I went for an interview to go for a PhD. I didn't get in. So I knew I came out of this situation without much of a plan. And I started talking to people going for interviews. And I got into this interview with this innovation lab from a bigger company. And I went to the interview. It's like, hey, they put a bunch of challenge in front of me from a statistical perspective to coding to problem solving. I performed well on like different topics, like from a statistic to coding. And it's like, hey, you could be a really good data scientist. And at that point, I didn't know what's data scientist. I didn't know what the job entails. So I stumbled upon it by having my interest in coding, statistics, math, problem solving.
And then you translated that into a career in the corporate world and industry. I saw on your CV that a couple of stops were TD and Boston Consulting Group. They sound a little different. So how did you put your expertise to work in those situations?
Kind of very similar to what you said. When I was doing my first job, it was more of me approaching everything very like in engineering. It's like, hey, I want to solve this problem only and only with data. At that point, I didn't have that much of a industry expert. So I could be like fully expected, I guess, at that point. But when I start moving at TD and BCG, I start applying more and more of, my qualitative knowledge to the problems. So that got me to TD. And in TD, I was working a lot with the team is doing personal banking, I think. And the reason I went there was, honestly, I was talking to a few people and it's like, hey, if you go to personal banking, they have the most amount of data. So that's what lured me to go to TD and work with it's like, okay, that's the place I want to be as a data scientist, where the most data resides. And I start gaining some qualitative knowledge, depth of industry there, which kind of make me ready to become a consultant, because in consultancy world, that's kind of become your bread and butter, your knowledge, your qualitative, your vision. It enables you to create hypotheses. Then you create the hypothesis, then you go test out those hypotheses with the data. So it's a combination of both. But I think at the first few years, you don't have that much industry knowledge to create even hypotheses properly, yeah?
When you're creating those hypotheses, Reza, are you thinking about customers, about people, about how they feel about banking, or are you thinking about numbers and data and patterns and that kind of thing, or both?
I think like you can go both ways, in a way that sometimes you see, like, you have a hunch because you've been in the industry, you've seen a lot of stuff, you have a hunch about it. Sometimes you see a weird pattern in the data and you develop the hunch, so that the initiation of that hunch hypothesis comes from both real world on the data, or the reason, like, you have even that hunch because you've seen a lot of data, so it can come from both perspectives. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this combination of thinking about people doing their banking, which has all kinds of emotional connotations and worry and fear, maybe confidence, and then the data patterns that give you insights into that.
Yeah, I can give you like even examples of it. Like maybe that would resonate even better. There were like we were working on this project that was about like how often people close their account, and we're like who we can retain. So it was a retention problem. That was one of the like one of my most successful projects that I've done. And we reached to these people like who we can save and who we cannot. And we reach to these type of people who are changing their bank account opening and closing very often with a very good credit score. And we find out like I at that point I had a hunch. It's like, hey, so the pattern I see, there are people who close account very often. The hunch for me was like, hey, they are probably the rate seekers, the people who look for the best deal in the market, and they in a whim they change their bank account. And we start creating that hypothesis, look at the little more information, try to keep them in the bank with different tools, and we kind of confirm that. At the end of the point, it's like, hey, these are the laws, we'll take it, they should go, but we don't send them promotional material anymore because they are don't bring much of a revenue. But the hunch that these are rate seekers kind of come from a combination of I see a pattern, plus I start thinking about it, how people react in a like this different situation, the people I know around me, and put these two together to come up with like, hey, this is a specific group called rate seekers. Even putting that name on it, like putting a label on it, that creates a lot of ease for like higher up people, the decision makers that you are passing this information to resonate like with the data rather than going and showing bunch of graphs and bunch of clusters. Telling the story with the data, that's another aspects of it. Like with the hunch, with the more qualitative information, you also improve your storytelling capabilities with data, and that can resonate in more successful implementations at the end. Yeah.
Did you add actual qualitative data to that, like focus groups or interviews with those people after you'd identified them? How do you combine the qualitative, the understanding that they're deal seekers?
Yeah, I mean, that case specifically, we ran some experiments and to find that out. In this case, not talking to people. Talking to people could be a good tool also. And that specific case, we ran some experiment by offering different pricing to different sets of people, see how they react, sending or not sending promotions, and see how they would react to different promotions. So running A/B tests mostly gave us the insight into the how they are reacting.
Yeah, that's great. The behavior revealing their motivations. It's a deduction. You went to Boston Consulting Group, and did you look at a lot of different industries there? What was the change versus focusing on banking?
When I started at BCG, because I had a lot of knowledge in banking, so I went to start again banking, but different part of the banking. I did a lot of business banking, moved to consumers, moved to CPG. So even like a strategy of how to put a data teams together. Yeah. So a lot of the people want like, hey, I want to start a data team. For example, in a bank, want to do it like in a wealth sector. They want to do a data team. How we structure it, how the team works together. Yeah. The breadth of projects that I was getting, it was a lot different from just what I was doing. There, I had a very clear agenda at the banks like, hey, make more money, bring more customers. Here was each different project was a different skill sets needed for it. So it expanded my expertise a lot by being there, both within the project type of project that I was doing and also the industry.
And then you revealed something there, Razor, I think points to your entrepreneurial leap, which is you were thinking about teams and how teams work together with data and analysis, and presumably that meant marketing teams and product teams and so on. Tell us about that understanding or that insight that you had about teams.
I can go very deep and talk hours about how the teams operate. But at that time, I was really working on the concept of if you have teams, are they need to operate in parallel with each other? For example, like you have a marketing team and a data team. Yeah. If you have a marketing team and a data team and they are fully parallel to each other, you kind of use them as a resource. So bring them, it's like, hey, I need this problem get solved. Yeah. That would look like more of a consulting. So your data team consults your marketing team on what to do and do problem solve. Or you can create pods That's like, hey, this pod want to solve this specific problem. Let's come together and find out how to solve it. Yeah. Then that becomes like you have a team that's one is marketing, one is data, one is doing some coding. So then you have a different type of team there. And that team like needs a manager. So if you hire a team for a specific function, or solve a specific problem, or you hire someone for a specific function. Yeah, both of them has benefits and drawbacks, but there is this method that it's getting more and more common. Like Shopify has it, Spotify has it, Meta has it, more and more tech companies bring it on. It's concept of you are a data person, you have your manager, you're hired for a function, but here and there for 6 months, 3 months, we create pods and we bring people to a project from different teams and tackle a problem. I mean, that's become so common, but at that point that I was doing it for banking, that was kind of a new concept. That type of concept didn't exist. Yeah.
So the team's defined by the problem it's trying to solve, and then you bring the right resources to bear for that.
Yeah, exactly. Then you can budget for the problem. It's like, hey, this project has this budget, and that budget translates to number of people. So like, okay, now this problem worth solving with that many people or not, because that's bring how much value does it bring. Yeah, that was one of the big changes that we saw in the how teams structure and tackle problems in corporate world.
So then I'm maybe getting ahead here, but that helped you in the leap to entrepreneurship. You started a company called WFHomie. I think that's the right way to say it. It helps corporations work together, teams work together, especially in COVID, where there's a lot of remote working. I think that's right. But tell us about it. Is that how you made the leap?
So I was really working on this concept and just thinking about the whole like concept of pod. Even when we talk about pods, it's like it was physically how these people were together. Because before you could have marketing in, I don't know, floor 12 and engineering in floor 11, and they could never saw each other. And the whole concept of bringing people together, it had a physical aspect to it. So they would even get a physical place for this problem to be solved by this team of people. Then suddenly at the middle of it, like COVID happened, and I caught like in BCG, which was like, I think I can call it the high performing teams. I see how the teams were crumbling and when they needed something like to work together. Yeah. The idea came across was like, hey, if you have a team of high performing individuals that's solving complex problems, the physical presence had a big effect. I mean, if you are running a call center, if you do the calls from your home or you do from a call center, had a little effect on your performance. Yeah, you are mostly working with someone on the other line than your coworkers sitting beside you. Yeah, these ideas like a call came together. It's like, hey, remote work creates problem for teams that are doing creative things, that are high performing, how we can solve this problem. And at that point, I honestly didn't have an answer. Like, have a few ideas, but no answer. But I knew that's time for me to like start exploring it. I had this entrepreneurial call for a while. I had a startup during my undergrad, got Aqua hired. Then I was working with different startups. So I always wanted to do that leap of faith to start it. And I said like, hey, this is the best time to do it. The disruption in market is happening. And usually the disruption in markets is the best time for innovators to go in and implement new solutions. Before the disruptions, usually all arbitrage are exploited by bigger companies. When the disruptions happen, new arbitrage are opening up, and who can move faster can take some market share. And the startups have the upper hand when the disruptions happen. So I was seeing a problem that is like worth solving. I saw the market is ready for it, and I thought I would be the right person to tackle it. So all the ingredients were there for me to start, like leaving my comfortable full-time job to start entrepreneurship
Yeah. Drill down a little bit more on this disruption from the customer's standpoint, if you would, Reza, because what you said is fascinating. That's the opportunity for entrepreneurs. You mentioned the crumbling of teams because of the introduction of remote work. Is that a good summary? But tell us more about the details. What were you observing?
There were a lot of things that I would saw. It's like, hey, people are getting burned out heavily. I was getting burned out heavily because I was working with a team in Germany, and I was working at ABCG, and I was working with a team in LA. So I was working in 3 different time zones, and you only can secure you are moving within the project. The project is moving forward. Is that like the way I learned it was a high touch point, like syncing with your team. That was the concept. Sync with your team as much as possible so you know you are going in the right direction. And what I noticed was like people didn't know how to communicate async. Yeah, that concept was a little foreign to them. So The first thing that I've done, we start looking into companies that were async for a while. And if you look at it, a lot of open source communities are async. Yeah. Even like companies like GitLab that are there to help a lot of open source communities are also like remote and they work very well as async. While the companies like, banking, a lot of tech companies, consulting fully sync. So it's like, hey, what we can learn from the async companies and bring that learning to these companies that are working like used to work together that make them achieve the goal they wanted. It needs new processes, new trainings, new data, all of those information. And work from home was there to bring that together. So the whole concept was around these information are measurable. I can measure where you are falling short. Yeah. Combination of the data, combination of like talking to the employees, combination of like sending surveys. We can combine all this together and see where you are falling short. I'm missing the communication to my boss, or I'm missing communication to my friends, or I'm missing some social aspect of my work. What are you missing? And then we suggest recommendation, and at the end the recommendations, like, it was very easy and actionable. Yeah. So it's like, hey, and that's how you implement this recommendation. And that was the like bread and butter of us. Yeah. Just finding out where you're falling short after you went remote and how to solve that problem for you.
What were some of those metrics, Reza, that you say you could measure how people were, you call it falling short? What were some of those metrics?
And interesting enough, you mentioned about qualitative and quantitative. So at first, when we started, we didn't have data. So we needed to rely a lot on the qualitative data or the reasoning that we know, like based on the papers or previous research. One of them was, if you look at the remote teams that are doing technical work, like coders, designers, system architect, they really suffer from disruptions into their workflow. Yeah. What we looked exactly is like, hey, your technical team, your dev team, your production team, how many meetings they have that are bigger than 5 people are attending it, and how much of it the day takes. Like, they have like 10 hours of that, those type of meetings, or 2 hours. And that was one of the things later on when we run the experiment had a lot of effect on the burnout of the developers. Long Zoom calls, like a lot of people that is not going anywhere, because these people are more action oriented. They want to get result oriented. They want to see what's coming up. And a lot of these meetings were not as result oriented as they expected. So they get burnout. It could be like introvert or extrovert, if you want to call it. I wouldn't call that. That was one of the easiest one. Just by implementing a way that we look at calendars, look at how much meetings your dev team has. We could predict if your team is getting burnout. We could predict if your like employee would leave the company or not. These information were very clear. Yeah. You could, like, previously, if you were in the office, you could see that. You could see like my engineers in the meeting room all day long. And that's not a good thing. Now you're remote. You don't have that visibility as easy as you had in the previous work. So kind of bringing that visibility back to your managers, to your executives.
One of the words that sometimes gets used in that situation, you talk about burnout and other things, but is engagement, which sounds kind of a qualitative idea, right? Do you feel
Yeah.
engaged or you don't feel engaged? Is that a relevant word for you, or you're much more focused on the metrics of burnout, let's call it?
No, at the end of the day, we were an employee engagement company, so we needed to define the engagement. Actually, these concepts are very interesting because if I come and talk about how much sale I have or how much closing I have, it's easily transferred to a number, and that number is understandable for everyone. Yeah. But when you talk about engagement, it's more qualitative, but you need to put a number on it. And a lot of people get too much to the waist, like, hey, what does that number mean? And my kind of approach to this one is that these are the proxy. I understand it's proxy. It's engagement is something very qualitative. We need to create a proxy for it. But if we don't create a proxy for it and don't measure it, we cannot improve it. If that proxy is just vaguely in the same direction of what you mean as engagement. Yeah. We try to put a number on engagement, and that number came from different sources. And we try to see if those numbers kind of like tell the same story for us or not. One thing that we were looking was like just simply ask the users, like, how do you feel like about the company? How do you feel you are part of the team? How do you feel like your contribution are valued inside the company. Just asking very direct questions from the users about how they feel inside the company, not per se like, well, how's your engagement, because that's just also vague, but it's like, how do you feel you've been heard inside the company? Yeah. The second piece was like the engagement on the kind of the forums, the channels, and everything else. Because again, before that, you could see your team members is talking to your other team members. Yeah. Like goes for parties, goes for like after events, or showing up in like meetings. You could visually see that. But now it all happens in the Slack channels, in groups, in like forums, in teams. The other thing that we look at is like how much that person is reacting to other messages, to public channels. And that will become another metrics of engagement for us. Yeah, we had some information like came from meetings, some from the metadata, and we have some information directly asking from the user.
And do you ask those questions inside the remote working apps like Slack and Zoom and so on, or do you ask them outside? Or
Yeah,
both?
actually, one thing that we found out was very interesting is like before that, all the questions were like the qualitative question was like asked once a year. Really good companies, they do it like once a quarter. And actually, something that I learned from BCG was like they were very on top of what's happening to the people. Because if you think about the consulting, there is no product, it's the people, what you are offering to other companies. And so, really, that concept was engraved to take care of the people inside the companies. And there we had like almost weekly, like a pulse surveys. Yeah. So I started to implement that pulse surveys, and I thought about it like, oh, it's a one. What I hated about that pulse survey is like you click somewhere, you go somewhere, and you need to answer something. And so, how about we start asking this pulse survey questions? So once a year, almost every month, but we send it inside a Slack, send it inside Teams. And then it would be like a click of a button for that person to answer. Yeah. So much low friction. One a small UX change can make a lot of difference. Like a lot of these companies have such a hard time to pass 60% engagement on their surveys. We had around 83% engagement rate just asking on a Slack and Teams, not even like chasing them. Yeah. We were, instead of asking once a year, we were asking it once a month. So much more frequent. We have frequent, I will call it real time data, what's happening inside the company, compared to those like once a year that could be like, hey, I got my bonus or I didn't got my bonus. That's how I feel about the company. Like continuously monitoring what's happening inside the company just by changing the UX a little bit. Instead of asking on a web page, we ask on integrated apps that we create on Slack and Teams.
It's like wearing your Apple Watch, right? It takes your pulse all the time, and you can monitor it whenever you want. Another word that I saw highlighted on the WFHomie site, or maybe in terms of your case studies, was recognition. That recognition takes on a new importance in these remote working hybrid teams. Can you say a little bit about the importance of recognition?
Yeah, the other thing that we felt it kind of happening, it was the lack of recognition inside companies, like people working in a void kind of. What does that mean? Like people do stuff, accomplish something, but they weren't that kind of celebration of the moments being successful. Yeah. And you hear a lot, it's like celebrate your small wins. That's not a joke. You really need to celebrate your small wins unless like you don't get the continuous productivity. So we saw that is one thing that people are mentioning a lot and missing inside the company, like employees complaining about that. And again, like we had two approach for solving the recognition problem. One was very simple. Again, like very app, a small UI. In a Slack and Teams, we created a app called Kudos. So you could send kudos to your teammate. That's just like, hey, kudos, Hunter, for like, running that great podcast. And that got a lot of usage for us. And that become like create that small wins. The second program that we had, we partnered with companies who are sending gift baskets, gift cards, all of those type of like a little more physical gift to the employees. So you could, all at the end of the day, I cannot take my team for a drink out at 5:30 because they did something nice, but I can send them a gift card. Yeah. Just, just say thank you to them. Or I can send them a like a Uber Eats or like a coffee or something. And we found that the reason people are not doing it, not because of the money, the budget exists. Actually, like funny enough, we talked to this company, they had around 100K budget for employee recognition, mid-sized company. And at the end of the year, we talked to them in December, they only used 5K of it. So the budget exists. They were like, hey, there is not enough resources. I don't know how to spend even this budget for my team. Yeah. So just making very easy user experience to recognize your team, to recognize your
Yeah.
colleague. The same way, like our whole like approach in work from home is like we need data. to make sure everything goes fine. But the data doesn't come from like, hey, asking for a data. You make an app, you make something that has added value, then you collect the data out of it. Yeah. At the end of the day, now we knew who sent recognition to whom, who sent the kudos to another person. So that was kind of the mindset. And that mindset of easy UX translated to high usage, and at the end that create a lot of engagement. So people want to be appreciative of each other, people want to have a good time, people want to be productive, but we just need to give them enough tool set to bring productivity. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice insight. Very human.
Yeah, it's just thinking about the human side, it's very interesting. It's like, again, as you mentioned, it's like very qualitative because you are a human too, and quantitative because you can see that usually like you can confirm it with the data, that's what people want or not.
So, one more word we'll explore with you, Reza, and get your take on it is culture. People talk about culture and you can design a culture for a company and so on. I think what you're implying is it's a culture emerges from how people work together. That if you get them to work together in this more aligned and cogent fashion that you're talking about, the culture will become good. It'll emerge. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think the culture is just one of those things. Is just what does that mean? It's just mostly just means how people work inside an organization. To me, that's a concept that we talked about it a lot in work from home and outside of it with like different leaders. And the culture comes from like three different sources. One is top down, like you as your manager or as executive or as the CEO have a vision as like, hey, I want to have a culture of being kind to each other. Very good thing. That's great. Or we have the culture to make sure the customers is first. That's what I want to convey. That's my value. Yeah. And I want this value affects the culture of my company. People are making decisions, work to each other. That's what becomes tops down. Another one is just like a lateral one. It's like, hey, I learn how to do stuff more and more from these people sitting beside me. And what we notice is going remote, those type of communication, the funnels that you are passing the culture information, it kind of start breaking down. The way we are thinking is like, if we fix this, the culture get fixed by itself. If I fix the communication channels between tops down, bottoms up, and lateral, like we don't need to do anything. We are not saying like you should have a culture of like customer first or whatever. Whatever you are gonna set, whatever you think that should be the culture, is only way to spread it if you have the communication channels open. So that was kind of the process that we are going after, and we used to measure that a lot, if like how people are talking to each other and where that breaks. And you always want a kind of a homogeneous like approach in your company. Yeah, you want to have like, if your culture is hardworking, you want everyone to work hard. Yeah, and this breaks in the communication can create like, oh, simply like if you have two teams, one in Europe, one in North America, in San Francisco, they have 9 hours of work difference. Yeah, they may never work in the same time. So, and that means like now they're growing two different cultures to your company. Maybe they don't understand each other. Maybe they cannot work together. What we say is it doesn't matter if you have even 1 hour of work together. If you have your async communication properly, your communication channel open properly, you still can create the culture inside your company.
Yeah, that's a great insight. So you can take the people sitting beside me was the culture to it's the people I'm communicating with and working with digitally. It's still culture.
I just want to mention that that's a hard work. People are not used to it. The other piece that we have is was a lot around like learning. So you need to teach them. Again, you need to make this one as simple as possible. Put work like that one we partner with a lot of coaches. That's what coming in. Like we have every week 2 sessions of coaching for just how to react in like a remote world, how to bring culture, like soft skills. That's something you need to put an effort for your team to make sure that's so easy for them to go and learn it. And you benefited the most from executive perspective, from the company perspective. If your culture works, if your people know how to communicate better, definitely you can translate it to the dollar value.
So what's the future, Reza? We talk about the future of work and you have a special insight into that. Where are we going? We've just had a new complication thrown in with AI and the ability to use that to help us, which seems like it's kind of individual more than team oriented. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Where do you think we're going with the future of work? What's next?
I think one major thing that's happening is AI creates some sort of equalizers around the concept of like communication. Yeah. You can see a lot of people that were like maybe handicapped, but like not learning how to communicate properly. Those are who benefiting the most right now from AI in organizations, because now I hear more and more people say, hey, I usually have an idea about the documentation and I just put it in ChatGPT and ChatGPT gives me the full documentation. Yeah. So I think very specific to the culture of like future of work, AI in one sense is really good. And it comes to the like it can improve the communication much better. And the other side, obviously, a lot of people feel threatened about like how AI is taking over jobs. What I've noticed is not about people taking over the jobs, it's about how the people who start using it the best, they can improve their productivity by multiple X. Actually, like this hype is recent, like it's 6 months. We have a very small development team. And the reason was one of our developers was like once told me like around 50% of work from Homie code that he wrote was written by Copilot. So he was already like working for us. He just graduated and he was working equivalent of like a mid-level senior developer for us really, really well. With the help of AI, his output was really good too. The quality was good. So you could see like the early adopters can get a lot of output out of it. We will see a big shift about productivity. And that's what all I'm thinking. It's like, hey, the productivity will improve. That's a good outcome.
Yeah, good. Optimistic. I appreciate that. Last question, Reza, is about entrepreneurship. You successfully sold your company. Congratulations. Tell us about the entrepreneurial experience. You always had the orientation, you said. You always felt like you were going to be an entrepreneur. You had a couple of startup businesses. Then you made the big leap from BCG to WFHomie, and now you're thinking about the next thing. What's your entrepreneurial experience? What was good? What was bad? How would you do it differently?
There are two things that comes to mind, one good, one bad. One good piece is like I enjoy the life more. So now the work is part of my life. I don't call it a work-life balance anymore. So you may heard of it. It's like a work-life harmony. So even I'm working out, it's not that like I'm working and taking away from my life. I like what I'm doing, and I think that opportunity only happens if you are entrepreneur. Yeah, it's harder happen if you're working inside a corporate environment. You have a lot of responsibility, but you also have a lot of control at the same time, and that brings usually like the satisfaction. The second piece is that I want to say like balance it out. It's a hard and lonely process. If imagine that I was a data scientist in TD. There were like 200 other data scientists in TD. It's like we were a group. We were doing a stuff together. Yeah. But when you're doing a startup, you are just you are the only person doing it. Yeah. You are the entrepreneur. You have the responsibilities. Yeah. You need to make hard decisions all the time. So that's the hard part of it. That's the part that you need to make an effort to make sure it doesn't affect you. I mean, people say like obviously it's a roller coaster. It's ups and downs. And ups and downs are harder if you are doing it alone. So that's another piece that is like usually gets a lot of founders. But I would say I'll do it again and again and again, because the rewards, even while you're doing it, not that like I sold my company and I was happy. During building something and people use, such a joyful moment. I remember when I was leaving, my whole thought was like, I want to build a product that's one person pays $1 for it. It's like, hey, I made something that people appreciate and want to buy from me. Yeah, that joy is like the joy of creating. It's undescribable.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. We call that creating value, and that's exactly the spirit that we hope to cultivate. So you brought us fantastic insights, Reza, into this combination of human understanding and then the technology and the data and how it can be put together for, as you said, a better culture, a better experience. It's more fun for people. It's more engaging. That's a wonderful combination. So thank you very much for sharing those insights with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure to have this conversation with you, and just talking about the experience is also bring a lot of good memories.
Good. Well, Reza, thank you very much. I hope we talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode. And check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.